Welcome to another episode of the podcast The Street Has Its Own Story, dedicated to Nikis Avenue in Thessaloniki, this 1300-meter coastal road stretching from the port to the White Tower. Today, we will combine historical facts, landmarks events, fun facts from international sources and details about the pier, the murders of consuls and a king, in order to give you a complete picture of this artery of the city. Let's explore it step by step, as if we were holding a cup of coffee by the seaside, gazing at the sea and Mount Olympus on the horizon. The history of Nikis Avenue begins in 1870, when the southern walls of the Ottoman Thessaloniki were demolished, creating a narrow street just 8 meters wide, known as Beyaz Güle Street, or White Tower Street. French sources call it Avenue de la Liberté, symbolizing the victory over the Turks, while Turkish sources compare it to the Cordon in Smyrna, referring to its multinational character until 1913. Fun fact about it, it is the most photographed and expensive street in the Balkans, with real estate prices ranging from 4 to 8,000 euros per square meter. With the liberation in 1912, during the Balkan Wars, it was renamed King Constantine Avenue, and later in 1939 to Niki, to honor the triumph entry of the Greek army in October 26, 1912. Starting from the western edge, Eleftheria Square or Victory Square, created in 1870 after the demolition of the seawall, was a symbol of modernization and the site of the Young Turk Revolution in 1908. After the Great Fire in 1917, it hosted refugees and Jews during the Second World War, and today it is a place of remembrance for the Holocaust. Moving on, we arrive at Aristotelus Square, the navel of the city, designed by Frenchman Ernest Embrard, after the fire of 1917. With neoclassical buildings and kiosks, it resembles a theatre overlooking the sea. French sources refer to it as Route Côtière, with picturesque views and beautiful cafes. Finally, there is the symbol of the city, the White Tower. Tourists and local pass by it every day, and it is a place of celebration every time a city or national team wins a trophy. Built in the 15th century by the Ottomans, after the conquest of the city in 1430, it replaced a Byzantine fortress and initially served as a defensive structure to protect the port. It is 34 meters high. Turkish sources call it Beyaz Güle and say that it was built by Suleiman. During the Ottoman period, it became the Tower of Blood. With liberation in 1912, it was whitewashed for cleansing, while the Greek flag was raised on what it was called now White Tower, using the mast of a sunken Ottoman ship, Fetih Bulent, which was torpedoed by Admiral Nikolaos Votsis a few days earlier. Today, it is a museum of the city's history and houses the permanent exhibition of the Museum of Byzantine Culture. Fun fact about the White Tower. During the First World War, it served as the Allies' communication center. If you walk down Nikis Avenue today, you will see people with cell phones, bicycles, tourists with ice cream in their hands, and that warm light of Thermaikos Gulf that makes everything look more beautiful. But a century ago, the same route had a different look and a different pace. It was the heart of cosmopolitan Thessaloniki. Large hotels with French names adorned the beach. The Grand Hôtel de l'Angleterre, the Splendid, and a little further on the Mediterranean Palace, then was called Méditerranée. Travelers, merchants, officers and artists who wanted to be at the center of things stayed there. From their balconies, they could look at the sea and in the afternoons hear the music from the waterfront cafes, mingling with the horns of the ships and the bell of the tram. There were many different cafes, smaller ones with iron tables, umbrellas and waiters in aprons. This is where the first political discussions, dates and acquaintances took place. If you walk down Nikis Avenue today, it's hard to imagine that there was once a shop here that smelled like Europe. It was located at the 45 Nikis Avenue, with tables facing the sea, marble counters, display cases full of pastry, chocolates, and the famous parfait chocolat that slowly melted on the spoon. It was more than just a pastry shop. It was the meeting place of urban Thessaloniki. Merchants, artists, journalists, everybody went there. It was the Floka patisserie, the most famous hangout in Thessaloniki during the interwar period. Here, coffee was never just a coffee. It was conversation, news, politics, flirting. In the 1920s and 1930s, Floka was reminiscent of Parisian café. Customers read newspapers in 3 different languages: Greek, French, and English. The waiters wore white shirts with black vests, and every afternoon, when the sun set over Themaikos Gulf, the light steamed in through the large windows and made the sugar in the pastries sparkle. This is where poets such as Georgios Themelis, writers such as Stratis Mirivilis, and journalists from the newspaper Macedonia would sit, each with their notebook, a cup of coffee, a pack of cigarettes, and a pastry in front of them. At the same time, you might see a Greek, a Jew, a Turk talking about politics and football. The smell of coffee mingled with the sea breeze and the aroma of the sweets. That was Floka, a small piece of Europe in the east. After the war, times changed. The tables disappeared, the boulevard changed its face. But those who lived in Thessaloniki during the interwar period were always recalling this taste of coffee at Floka, with the sea in front of them and life flowing like melting sugar. Nikis Avenue was both a showcase and a mirror of the city. It was there where high society went for a stroll, where news from Europe arrived, where history mingled with an everyday life. Today the names and facades may have changed, but if you stand quietly for a moment and look at the sea, you will understand that this avenue has never lost its role, to connect the old with the new, and Thessaloniki with its soul. At the beginning of the 20th century, the pier along Nikis Avenue was a commercial hub for ships and goods. It was like seeing a forest of ship masts, with goods mainly in boxes and bundles, and porters coming and going. It functioned as a trade hub connecting Thessaloniki with the interior of Macedonia and Thessaly, as well as of international routes to Asia via the Bosporus. It was vital for exports such as tobacco and imports of goods, with intense activity. During the First World War, with the entry of the Allies, the pier was converted into a military center. It was used to disembark troops, horses, trucks, and supplies, supporting operations against the Turks in Gallipoli and against the Bulgarians at the Macedonian front. The sea was filled with barges and boats, while over 150,000 soldiers camped into the city. This use contributed to the final offensive of 1918 that led to the armistice. After the war, the pier supported the Greek campaign in Asia Minor, 1919, sending troops to Smyrna. In 1923, it became the gateway for over 1 million Orthodox refugees from Anatolia due to the population exchange between Greece and Turkey. This drastically changed the city, with the pier being used as mass arrivals and distribution of aid. Finally, during the Second World War, it was once again used by the Germans, Nazi, for the same reasons. The Great Fire of 1917 was started by a French soldier, destroying 9,500 buildings and left 70,000 people homeless, affecting mainly Jews. It led to the reconstruction of the city by Embrad, shaping modern Thessaloniki. As we often say, Thessaloniki was born from its ashes. Let's now look at other events that marked this avenue. Thessaloniki 1876, a city of the Ottoman Empire, full of life but also tension. The sounds of the market mingled with the psalms of the churches and the calls from the minarets. Christians, Muslims, Jews, Armenians all lived together, but with an invisible wall between them. It was time of great turmoil in the Balkans, uprising, reforms, rumors of independence. And amid this fragile balance, an unlikely incident was to trigger one of the darkest episodes in the city's history. It all started with a girl. Stefana, or Veliko, as some sources call her, was a young Christian woman, probably Bulgarian, who, according to the testimonies, wanted to convert to Islam in order to marry her beloved. This was considered provocative, even dangerous at that time. When she arrived in Thessaloniki, rumors began to circulate that she had been kidnapped, that she was being pressured, that someone wanted to hide her. No one knew the truth, but everyone had an opinion. And as often happens in history, rumors turned into anger, and the anger turned into a mob. On May 6, 1876, a crowd of Muslims gathered at the Satli Mosque in the city center. Inside the building, the consuls of France and Germany, Gilles Moulin and Henry Abbott, had taken refuge trying to negotiate the girl's release. Suddenly, tensions erupted. Voice rose, doors were broken down, and within minutes, the two diplomats were lynched by the mob. Thessaloniki was plunged into chaos. The Ottoman authorities were unable to react in time. Perhaps they were afraid. Perhaps they were taken by surprise. However, the incident caused an international uproar. Two consuls murdered on Ottoman soil, that meant a diplomatic crisis. France and Germany demanded justice. The Ottoman government, under pressure, proceeded with arrests, but the damage was already there. Thessaloniki had made headlines across Europe, not for its beauty, but for the blood spilled on its streets. The incident caused an international outcry, with European warships arrive in Thermaikos Gulf. The Ottomans publicly executed 6 persons of the mob at the seaside as punishment. All these were part of the decline of the Ottoman Empire, with corruption and nationalistic tension. The case may resemble a romantic tragedy, but it led to a diplomatic crisis with compensation and pressure for reforms. But what does this story tell us? Perhaps that fanatism and fear can turn a misunderstanding into tragedy. Perhaps that rumors, when left unchecked, are more dangerous than weapons. Perhaps that cities, no matter how beautiful they are, may always hide the shadows of their history. And Thessaloniki has many such shadows. Thessaloniki, spring of 1903, a port city of the Ottoman Empire with colorful and multilingual population, a crossroad of cultures, but also of rivalries. Europe is in turmoil. Nationalism is on the rise in the Balkans. And against this backdrop, a small group of young people decides to shake up the empire. They were the so-called Varkarides or Geminids, young Bulgarian anarchists from Monastir, members or supporters of the Internal Macedonian Revolutionary Organization, VMRO. They called themselves Varkarides because they were using a small boat to secretly cross the borders during their secret meetings. They believed that only spectacular, violent actions could draw Europe's attention to Macedonia. They wanted to provoke international intervention and expose, as they said, the injustice of Ottoman rule. In April 1903, they put their plan into action. Secretly, with handmade bombs and fuses, they infiltrated Thessaloniki. Their goal: to strike symbols of Ottoman power and European influence. First, they attempted to blow up Ottoman Bank, the symbol of international capital in the city. The explosions caused panic, injuries, and destroyed part of the building. Then, one of the bombers, Traian Kitov, blew up the French steamboat Guadalquivir in the harbor. A huge explosion shattered windows all along the waterfront. The flames lit up the sea, and the smoke was visible as far away as Ano Ladadica. Within a few hours, the city was paralyzed. The residents thought war had broken out. No one knew who was attacking and why. The Ottoman authorities reacted violently. Dozens of Bulgarian suspects were arrested and many of them executed on the spot. The remaining members of Arkaris were killed in battles with the police or blew themselves up with their bombs. Thessaloniki had never experienced such terror. These attacks were not isolated incidents. They were the prelude to a wider uprising, the Illiden Uprising, which broke out a few months later in Macedonia. The Bulgarian rebels hoped that Europe would be moved and support their independence. Instead, these attacks in Thessaloniki caused terror and condemnation. Western newspapers spoke of anarchists, Macedonian chaos, and acts of desperation. No one openly supported the perpetrators. The explosion stopped, but the fire in Macedonia has just been lit. A few months later, the Illiden Uprising was brutally suppressed, and the Varkaris went down in history as a symbol of vain, violent dream. Today the port of Thessaloniki is quiet. The waterfront bear no resemblance to that April. Only the old archives, the yellow newspapers, and the testimonies of the residents keep alive the memory of the explosions that once terrified the entire city. And now we walk in Thessaloniki in 1908, when a few young men decided to change the history. Once again, the Young Turk Revolution. Walking down Nikis Avenue today, it is hard to imagine that a piece of Balkan history was played out on these very same asphalt and sidewalks. Before becoming the cosmopolitan showcase of Thessaloniki, this coastal avenue was the scene of a political turmoil and one of the epicenter of the Young Turk Revolution of 1908. Thessaloniki was the headquarters of the Young Turks, a secret organization of officers and intellectuals who sought constitutional reforms, equality, and modernization of the state. The meetings, contacts, and military movements of many of them began or ended in this coastal zone of the city, the area that would be later called Nikis Avenue. It was the summer of 1908 when the revolution broke out. Imagine standing at the west end of Nikis Avenue, where the sea embraces the city. On July 24, 1908, thousands gathered, holding banners and shouting for freedom. The Young Turks proclaimed the restoration of the constitution right there, in this square, which was created in 1870 after the demolition of the seawall. The square was named Eleftherias, freedom, after this very event, and Nikis Avenue starts right there. It is as if the uprising christened the street, making it a symbol of change. The city experienced an indescribable night of excitement. On the coastal road, in front of the cafes and European hotels, Greek, Jewish, and Ottoman citizens celebrated freedom together, the restoration of the constitution. It was a rare moment of unity on the avenue then known as Karaburnu Yolu, or Quai de la Mer. The beach lanterns were lit, bands played, and people shouted freedom, Hurriyet. For one night, Victory Avenue became the symbol of a new era. The newspapers of that time wrote that it was a night when Thessaloniki became Europe. And now we come to another tragic event. It is 1913, 6 months after liberation, and King George I is in the city to consolidate the Greek presence. It is a time when political developments and events indicate that better days are slow in coming, and on contrary, the drums of war show no sign of falling silent. King George I of Greece was assassinated on the afternoon of March 18, 1913, in Thessaloniki, near the White Tower, during a walk. The perpetrator was Alexandros Schinas, an anarchist, or presumed madman, who shot him in the back at close range. The king died almost instantly, while Schinas was arrested immediately. The incident occurred shortly after the liberation of Thessaloniki during the Second Balkan War. Schinas, who claimed to be unemployed and hungry, committed suicide or jumped out of the window while in custody. The assassination shocked Greece and was linked to conspiracy theories about the involvement of foreign powers and anarchist plots against the kings of the Balkans. Today, Nikis Avenue is a boulevard full of people walking, running, or riding their bikes on its coastal front. Some might say it resembles Nice or Smyrna. There you will find cafes, restaurants, and hotels. It is an entertainment center with a cinema, Olympion, theaters, and a meeting place for celebrations. It hosts consulates and continues to play with the waves next to the sea. Nikis Avenue is a poem of salt, history, and life. Thank you for listening to another podcast in the series of The Street Has Its Own Story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share it, and send your comments to masterchr@gmail.com. Until our next trip to the streets of Thessaloniki, remember, behind every name and every step, there's a story. Good night from Thessaloniki.